The text on her phone blurred as tears welled in her eyes. Sorry, can't make it tonight. Something came up. 37 minutes she'd been sitting there, nursing a drink that had long since gone warm, the ice melted into sad little islands. Emma looked up at the restaurant's ambient lighting, blinking back tears, determined not to be that person crying in public. She never imagined that being stood up would lead to the conversation that would completely alter the course of her life. Emma gathered her coat and purse, dignity barely intact, when an elderly woman at the next table caught her eye. "Sweetheart," the woman said, her voice warm like honey and tea, "would you mind if I joined you for a moment? My ride is running late, and I could use the company." Something in the woman's eyes, a knowing kindness, made Emma hesitate, then nod. The woman introduced herself as Ruth, easing into the chair across from Emma with the careful movements of someone who had lived long enough to know that rushing rarely improved anything. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant bob, and despite being well into her 70s, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that immediately commanded respect. "Bad date?" Ruth asked, not unkindly. Emma laughed, a hollow sound. "No date at all, as it turns out." Ruth nodded, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I was stood up once, back in 1968. I sat in a diner for 2 hours, convinced he was just running late." She smiled, a faraway look in her eyes. "Best thing that ever happened to me." Emma raised an eyebrow, skepticism written across her face. How could being humiliated possibly be a good thing? "Because, my dear," Ruth said, signaling the waiter for 2 fresh drinks, "it forced me to have dinner alone. And when you're alone, you notice things. You notice people. That night, I noticed a young man reading a book I loved. We started talking, and 52 years later, I still wake up next to him every morning." Emma felt something loosen in her chest. "That's a beautiful story, but I don't think lightning will strike twice." Ruth's laugh was rich and full. "Oh, I'm not suggesting you'll meet your soulmate tonight. But being stood up taught me something more valuable than finding love. It taught me about resilience." As their drinks arrived, Emma found herself leaning forward, drawn into Ruth's presence. There was something magnetic about this woman, as if she carried wisdom like others carried smartphones, essential and always accessible. "I was 24, Ruth continued, working at an advertising firm where women were expected to serve coffee and look pretty. That night, after being stood up, I realized I'd been waiting for permission my whole life, waiting for someone to tell me I was good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. And suddenly, sitting alone in that diner, I decided I was done waiting." Emma's own disappointment began to feel smaller as Ruth spoke. The restaurant around them faded into background noise as Ruth's story unfolded. "The next day, I walked into my boss's office and pitched a campaign I'd been working on in secret. He was shocked, women didn't do that in those days. But the campaign was good. Really good. 6 months later, I was the first female creative director at the firm." Ruth took a sip of her drink, her eyes never leaving Emma's face. "So tell me, what are you waiting for permission to do?" The question hit Emma like a physical force. What was she waiting for? At 32, she had a decent job in marketing, a small apartment, and a dating life that clearly left something to be desired. But her dreams, the novel she'd been writing in fragments for years, the travel she kept postponing, the career change she constantly talked herself out of, those remained safely tucked away in the "someday" category. "I've been working on a book," Emma admitted, the words feeling strange in her mouth. She rarely talked about her writing. "But it's probably not any good. And anyway, who has time to write a novel while working full-time?" Ruth's expression softened. "May I tell you something I wish someone had told me at your age?" She didn't wait for Emma to respond. "Time will pass whether you pursue your dreams or not. 5 years from now, you can be 5 years older with a completed manuscript, or just 5 years older. Emma felt her throat tighten. But what if I fail? Oh, you will, Ruth said with surprising cheerfulness. Repeatedly and spectacularly. Failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of it. As the evening progressed, Ruth shared more of her life story, the advertising campaigns that flopped, the risks that paid off, the marriage that endured despite challenges that would have broken weaker bonds. She spoke of raising 3 children while building her career, of fighting for her place in a male-dominated industry, of losing her parents and later, her youngest son to cancer. Life will break your heart, Ruth said, her voice gentle but firm. That's guaranteed. But it will also fill it to bursting if you let it. Emma found herself sharing too, about her childhood dreams of becoming a writer, about the practical career path she'd chosen instead, about the relationship patterns that kept leading her to men who couldn't commit. Ruth listened with the rare attention of someone who wasn't just waiting for her turn to speak. You know, Ruth said as the restaurant began to empty around them, my husband is probably wondering where I am. He wasn't actually supposed to pick me up, we drove here together and he's waiting at the bookstore next door. Her eyes twinkled mischievously. I saw you sitting alone, checking your phone, and I recognized that look. I hope you don't mind an old woman's interference. Emma was stunned. You mean you? Sometimes the universe doesn't send us what we want, Ruth said, reaching across the table to pat Emma's hand. Sometimes it sends us what we need. As they prepared to leave, Ruth wrote something on a napkin and slid it across the table. This is my email address. Old as I am, I've embraced technology. Send me the first chapter of your book by next Friday. But. No buts, Ruth interrupted. I spent 40 years in advertising. I know good writing when I see it. And if it needs work, well, editing is where the magic happens anyway. They walked out together into the cool evening air. A distinguished older gentleman stood waiting outside the bookstore, his face lighting up when he saw Ruth. She introduced Emma, and there was something in the way they looked at each other, a lifetime of love and friendship, that made Emma's heart ache with longing and hope. As they said their goodbyes, Ruth hugged Emma tightly. Remember, she whispered, being stood up isn't the end of the story. It might just be the beginning.